Welcome to our Thursday Hangout Habits. I am delighted to have today's guest talk with us about how to handle work, play, love when no one has the time. This is Brigid Schulte from the Better Life Lab in Washington, D.C. We're just delighted to have her on board. But of course, I have a few things we need to go through first. If you have not dialed in before, welcome. This is our weekly Hangout Habits. These are live online calls hosted by the Swing Shift. We hold them every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we focus on relevant job search strategies and topics. The goal is to give you actionable tips to get into the habit of looking for jobs and focusing on your search. When we have time, we have practice and networking, and then of course there's accountability, because we all know accountability is a key component of job search. To that end, we are running our second accountability program cohort this fall. We have another one coming in January. These are small, moderated groups with real-time progress check-ins. We're really excited about this program because we kicked it off in the summer. We had great feedback. We've got some wonderful cohorts running this fall. We run these live and online, and they do have video on demand. So if this is something you feel like you need, let us know. Coming up, because we've always got new stuff coming up. Next week, we're so excited to welcome the head of Accolades, HR, Compensations, and Benefits Group, Britt Provost, and her colleague and my colleague, Adrienne Musunegi, who is the Senior Director of Product at Accolade. It's a healthcare startup that recently went public. We're going to talk about the power of networking. Britt, if you know Britt, she is the queen of networking with a purpose, and she, Adrienne, and I have a very interesting backstory about how we got to know each other, how they got to know each other, and how you can use this to your benefit. The week after that, Katie Hall, who runs Katie Hall Communications, is going to talk about resilience in communications and how you use that to your best benefit when you're going out and talking with people. She does a lot of work here in the Pacific Northwest with a lot of public interest groups. She was instrumental in working with a lot of organizations that were focused on the protests at Capitol Hill. So we're really excited to hear Katie's remarks. And like many of us, she is balancing home and work and kids, and she's excited to come in. So just let you know, if you want more, join our Facebook community and follow us online. But enough of that. I want to get to talking with Bridget. She is an award-winning journalist for the Washington Post and the Washington Post magazine, and she won a Pulitzer Prize, so I'm already in awe of her. She is the founding director of the Good Life Initiative at the New America Foundation, which is a nonpartisan think tank, and she directs the Better Life Lab. Her work there seeks to elevate the conversation about how women work and how they balance home and everything else that's going on. And so she is exploring transformative solutions and highlighting how work life and gender equity issues are key to women's excellence, productivity, innovation, as well as having a full, authentic, meaningful life for everyone. She's also the author of a book that I am in the middle of reading called Overwhelmed, which is about time pressure in modern life. One character in the book calls time a rabid lunatic running naked and screaming as your life flies past you. And that really spoke to me right now. We're all, I think, grappling with this concept. So Bridget's work is really focused on understanding the historical and cultural roots of being overwhelmed. Today, she's going to talk to us a little bit about her career, her work at the Better Life Lab, and some insights on advocacy, what corporations could think about as they're working here, and what individuals can do. So she and I are going to have a little conversation. I'm going to stop sharing, and Sarah, it's going to be me and Bridget. So Bridget, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. And I always, as an East Coast native, I always love having East Coasters in here. But you're from Portland originally.
Yeah, so don't call me an East Coaster. I know I've lived out here for a
Oh,
long time, and I certainly value it. I live in a wonderful place. I live in the Delray neighborhood of Alexandria, Virginia. Absolutely love it. It's like living in a small town. But no, I'm from
yeah.
Oregon, so I just Oregon, born and raised, and Oregonian to my soul. So Pacific
So is
Northwest
Sarah,
all the
and you're
way.
saying it right. Well, listen, the first question I want to ask you about, and we have many people that we work with here who started their work in journalism and publishing and watched that industry just shake under their feet. So you built your career in journalism and you worked at I remember Knight Ridder.
Yeah.
You've been a staff writer at the Post, now at New America. And that's a big shift, especially in this segment that has shifted so dramatically. So can you talk a little bit about how you moved from journalism to advocacy?
Well, yeah, and the first thing I would say is, I don't really consider that I have moved from journalism to advocacy because what I'm still doing is journalism, but it's an expanded notion of what journalism can do and be. And so, so I guess that's the first thing I'd say. The other thing is, it's sort of a joke. My husband's also a journalist, and we would look at each other as we were trying to pay our bills. We were
Yeah,
in print newspapers, so you never made money in that. It's like, well,
right.
what are we doing? Why doesn't somebody go into PR so we can pay the mortgage? Yeah, why are we doing this?
Right.
And we really, we were in the field because we love it. We love it is such a privilege when someone tells you their story. I did a lot more like feature writing, narrative writing. So you bring in, kind of like the trends of the day, the news of the day, certainly, but I was sort of focused on news from the inside out, so to speak, what it felt like to live in this modern moment. Somebody once described my true beat as human ecology, and so I
Oh,
love
love that.
that. And, it wasn't like working in an office. It wasn't, I had done other jobs and I would like want to jump out a window at the end of the night, I mean, and I say, I shouldn't joke like that, but I found them, draining and depressing.
Right.
And so this was something that was really energizing and, exciting. And it wasn't perfect. There were plenty of times that I thought that I don't want to go cover the snowstorm. I really want to do something more substantive, so
Right.
it's not like every day was great and roses. There were plenty of frustrations in there. But it clearly was from the moment I started a dying industry. And I can tell you the very first career fair I went to when I was in high school, the very first thing, and of course I went to the journalism career fair because I was doing journalism in high school and I thought it was great and I loved it. I'm curious about things. I want to learn. What better thing to do in your life than your job is you get to learn stuff every day.
Right.
That was exciting to me. But the very first thing that the person said, and he did not make it in journalism. I think he'd studied journalism, and I don't know why they had him come and talk to our group, but I will never forget this. The first thing he said is, "You all want to be journalists?" And we all like eagerly raised our hands, and he said, "You can't do it. None of you will do it. It's a dying industry. You can't make
Wow.
it. Don't even try." And I just remember that just sort of made me angry. Like, well, don't tell me I can't do it, but I knew from the start that it was going to be difficult. And I knew from the start that it meant that, what might have been an easier path 10 years before, certainly not for women. It's never been easy for women in journalism.
Right.
But for other journalists, it was not going to be that same way. The traditional path was you started in a small place, you moved to a medium place, you moved to a bigger place, and then you got to do national stuff. And so I knew that going in, that what I needed to be focused on was the work itself, and the work itself that gave me, joy or energy, and that I wouldn't be as focused on the career aspect of it. And maybe that was dumb, but I really felt like if I was going to survive, that's what I needed to do.
I think that that's a very common trait that many women focus on this, where they say, I really want to focus on the work, right? And the career will come. And in your case, that absolutely has been the case, right? Because it sounds like what drew you to the work are the stories and the people that are behind it. And you alluded to this in the beginning. So maybe I'll go to my next question, because you're currently serving as the director of the Better Life Lab at the New America Foundation, and you're looking to change policy and practice and culture so people can make better choices about how to combine all of our competing responsibilities right now. Um, as you thought about doing this advocacy work, what were the things that were transferable for journalism? Because you say you're pretty much doing the same job. What were transferable to journalism that you're now doing in advocacy?
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, and interestingly, what I'm doing now, I actually pitched to my editors at the Washington Post, and they
Fascinating.
weren't interested. And so I had had my fellowship at New America
Mhm.
when I was working on my first book, and I was going to have a coffee with Anne Marie Slaughter, who had just come in as the new president and CEO of New America. And so we just sat down. She said, "Well, we'd love to have you back. And you know, what would it take to get you back?" And I just said, "Well, how about this?" And I handed her the two-page memo that I'd handed the editors at the Washington Post that they were not interested in. And she said,
Yeah.
"I love this." And you know, she had just found some funding for the work family program. And so I came in, and I was initially going to be a fellow to work on my next book. And instead, the director of the work family program at the time left. And then Anne Marie called. I literally had just given my notice at the Post, and she
Yeah.
called before I'd even started and said, "I need you to be the director." And I was
Right.
like, "Oh my, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be a director. I don't know how the nonprofit world works. But how do you say no? Like, it's like the ocean has like washed up at your door. You know,
Yeah.
you know, you either like dive in, or, you know, you go back inside." And I thought, well, if I'm going to make this change, let's go all in.
Well,
So it's
Bridget,
been,
now that I would say some people would be anxious or nervous about making a proposal to somebody like Anne Marie Slaughter. I know I would. I'd be a little starstruck. Were you just like, well, I've got nothing to lose? What did you think about when you did that?
when I gave her my proposal,
Yeah.
well, you know, I knew Anne Marie, you know, because
Mhm.
she had been on the board at New America, and so I'd met her at various retreats and gatherings. She was familiar with my work, you know, so it wasn't that scary. It was sort of like, here's an idea, you
Mhm.
know. And I think that's the cool thing about think tanks. It's, you know, it's all about ideas, and if it's a good
Right.
idea, it'll live. If it's not such a great idea, go back and think about why and how you
Right.
can make it better. So yeah, I mean, what did I have to lose? You know, I'd already
Right.
been turned down at the Post, and so if you know, and I didn't really expect anything, and if anything, it was more like, well, what do you think about this? Um, you know, so that was, yeah, I guess you get to a point where, what have you got to lose?
Right. Right. This is a trend that we see. Sarah and I talk with a lot of people about that, where we say, make your ask. You just don't know where it's going to go. And because you and I have talked a little bit before this, I don't think that you could have foreseen how this was going to pan out when you said, I'm out of here.
Well,
No.
and even at the Post, you know, I have to say there is so much that I loved about that work, and there was a lot that I loved about the
Yeah.
Washington Post, but I was also incredibly frustrated because I had spent 18 months becoming an expert on, you know, work family issues, on gender equality, on basically how difficult we make it in this country for women, for people of color, for anyone
Yes.
with caregiving responsibilities. And we just expect that that's just the way that it has to be. And I had done all of this research, and I had gone to other countries, and I had looked at the policies, and I thought,
Right.
it does not have to be this way. There are alternatives. There's really good research that shows that the alternatives can actually lead to better outcomes. Why are we not
Right.
having substantive conversations around this? And so I became more passionate about that than, again, I was about my career, which maybe is not so smart, but it was just like, well, this just doesn't make any sense. And if people at the Washington Post weren't listening, I needed to find a way to do that work, because I saw a real hole, if you will, in just the way that the
Yeah.
national conversation was going in the United States, and it's doing all of us a disservice. And so I became very passionate about bringing that conversation to the fore. So if it hadn't been New America, I would have continued looking for other ways to do it.
Right.
Um, so I have to say, though, it's not like it was great. Like, oh, this is exactly what I want to do. This is the
Right.
right thing. I was really torn. There was a lot that I love about being a journalist full time. And I do get to do journalism, but now I'm a director. So I got to do management and
Right.
fundraising and, you know, all sorts of other stuff that, you know, keep me up at night because I'm not trained to do that. And I'm learning as I go. Um, you know, but what I started doing at the Post is I started this file, and I called it The Way Forward, because I didn't know what it looked like. You know, it's
Mhm.
not like there was another job I could go to. It's not like
Yeah.
there was another step, you know, that the way seemed closed at the Washington Post. So what was the way forward? And I didn't know, but I would have conversations with people who seemed interesting or were doing interesting work.
Right.
You know, it was where I threw files and stories that I would read. And I just kind of let it percolate for, you know, about a year or so. And so that when this opportunity came up, I'd already been percolating. Like I wasn't really happy where I was. I didn't know what it looked like to be happy and go someplace else.
Right.
And frankly, I had two kids who were about to go to college. So it's not like I could just like quit. And I had a big, you know, I have a mortgage. And so I had
Right.
responsibilities. So I couldn't just quit and like write poetry in a cabin in the woods somewhere, which still seems to be my fantasy, that that's kind of what I want to do at some point. I couldn't do that. And
Right.
so what was realistic? What would kind of move me forward? And that really helped a lot, just to kind of be exploring. And I remember some of the best advice I got at the time was from a woman I'd actually interviewed and spent time with for my book. She was a time management and productivity coach. And when I told her, I was like, I'm worried about this. I don't know if it's the right thing. I don't know if it's ideal. And she just stopped me and she said, maybe it's not the right step, but who knows what that ever is? Why don't you think
Right.
about it as the next step? You know, and
Yes.
it's you're about the way forward, and it's about movement, and this is movement. And so that
And
has really helped me a lot.
and it's funny because you're discounting your management of your career. I actually think you've been very uh, proactive about that. I can't say that I have a file where I go, "Ooh, that's very interesting," and that's very interesting. I think that's very, very smart. And this is Sarah and I talk with people about this all the time. Your next step doesn't have to be the perfect step. It just has to be, as you say, the way forward. I want to ask a little strategic question, then I want to ask a tactical question, if that's okay. So
Sure.
strategically, you do a lot of advocacy work, and I'm guessing you talk with companies a lot. We have a lot of corporate partners who are asking us right now, what can we do to accommodate these very stretched working parents? I mean, we're all in this bind right now. And I will be frank with you, Bridget, we are hearing very mixed feedback from companies who, you know, on the one hand, they want to retain their working parents, both men and women. And at the same time, they're not budging on their expectations regarding work, deliverables, face time. And I'd be curious from the work to hear from the work that you're doing, if you've got guidance for companies there. And then, of course, my next question is going to be about individuals. But let's talk about companies for a
Yeah,
second.
absolutely. No, we do a lot of, I would say we do more research and education,
Yes.
and certainly that leads us to a point of view. I think of advocacy as somebody who goes on the Hill and like advocates for particular policies, and we don't do that. You know, and we're not
No.
like, you know, we're a 501(c)(3, you know, nonprofit. So we're really about awareness and education, but we do a
Okay.
lot of reporting and research, and we talk a lot to companies. Um, you know, and through COVID, it is so clear that people, particularly women, particularly parents, particularly working mothers, they are stretched beyond the breaking point. If you look at some of the surveys, the stress is off the charts, the anxiety is off the charts, the feeling of time pressure is just, we've never been at this place before. And some companies are doing interesting and innovative things, but not enough. And a lot of companies don't know what to do. And so one of the first things that we'll say is you have to understand what your people are going through. So for companies, that's the first thing is, do you understand, you know, what your employees, what your workers are facing? So do the work, whether it's in conversations or surveys or pulse surveys, depending upon your on the size. You have to have a better sense of what's going on, but you also have to know that if you have not built a culture of trust, people are not likely to tell you. Because in the United States, we have these ideal worker norms where we
Yes.
expect people to be always on, always available, always ready to work. So if that is the culture that you've created, then you might have somebody who is working till like, you know, all hours of the day and trying to homeschool and doing everything. And they will try to present as the ideal worker because that's what they think you will reward. And all of that is doing is creating this horrendous disconnect that is leading, frankly, to employee burnout, ill health, and stress. And then when you look at what's actually happening, it's literally pushing largely women out of the
Yeah.
workforce. So
Right.
it is incumbent upon businesses to understand what the reality that their employees are facing, and then to really be real. Honest to God, if you look at performance, like the expectations, so much of work, there's a whole book that's written called Bullshit Jobs. A lot of our work, a lot of it is garbage. I hate to say that, but
Right.
that is true. And this gives companies an opportunity to really focus on what is your value proposition? What are you really doing? What are the most important things to focus on? And reorient toward that. Prioritize that, communicate that, set your performance metrics around that. And
Right.
dispense with all of these like extraneous Zoom meetings and this and that. And have you done this particular report that doesn't mean anything?
Right.
Cut the chaff, because there's plenty of it, and really focus on the value proposition, and that will help focus and prioritize how people organize their work, and that will also help focus you on performance metrics. But I
Yeah.
think this is also really critical. Communicate what those performance metrics are and how they are different now in COVID, because we're all in a completely different world. It is unfair to try to judge people on their performance based on, a world that no longer exists. And so that takes work. So
It
managers and
does.
leaders need to do the work to figure that out and
You
communicate
meant
it
you
effectively.
mentioned that there's some innovative solutions. Is there a program or an approach that you've seen in your research that you think is really working well?
Well, I think that it's really clear right now that all of the companies that used to say we could never possibly work flexibly, we can never possibly work remotely, everybody needs all hands on deck. We
Right.
reward FaceTime. If you're here in the office late, you're an amazing worker. I think all of that now has gone out the window, and I'm hoping that companies and leaders in particular are seeing that basically that was status quo, old style thinking that wasn't even true before COVID. And so I
Right.
do feel like the best companies are recognizing, like, wow, we really can work differently and we can still be pretty productive, and people can do amazing work even under trying circumstances. So what I'm hoping is that moving forward, that this will create different ways of working. And the most important thing for a lot of workers is to have, I want to call it flexibility, but what it really is schedule control. It's more say over
Yes.
when, how, and where you do your work.
Yes.
And the research has been clear before COVID that you actually get better results that way. And I think now there is just no going back. You cannot argue that people have been able to do amazing things under very trying circumstances.
Right. Right. And so that's good, as we do a lot of work with companies. And so that's great guidance for us as a business. For individuals, can you talk a little bit? I want to talk about the Better Life Lab, and then let's talk about Overwhelmed, which I got to tell you, I'm thoroughly enjoying. Um, I have enjoyed the Better Life Lab talks. I know you have some of these, but can you talk about some tactical things that you all are doing that help women who are really grappling with this responsibility mix? And as you can tell, I'm one of them, because as you know, it's the American women that this is falling on right now.
Yeah. So at the Better Life Lab, what we try to do is we kind of our bigger mission, if you will, is we try to move policy, public policy, workplace practice, and
Yeah.
the larger culture, so that we can, so that we have the systems that enable people to combine their work and care in meaningful ways across the arc of their lives, which means, paid family leave. It means high quality, accessible, affordable childcare. It means flexible work with schedule control for workers. It means end of life and elder care, support there. So what we do, we work in three buckets. We look at how do we change work and work systems. We look at how do we change public policy so it really supports 21st century families. Most of our public policy, the little that we have, is really embedded in a kind of a 1930s era paradigm
Yes.
of the male breadwinner and the female who works works in the home for no pay. And the majority of American families just aren't like that anymore. Even our tax policy supports that kind of breadwinner homemaker family. So we're really trying to push, kind of push that public policy to match the reality that people are living. And then the final area that we look at is really rethinking gender equality. so often when we think about, gender equality, we think about, women and women's advancement in the public sphere. And that's important. And that is critically a lot of what we focus on. But to get to real gender equality in the public sphere, you need gender equality in the private sphere at home, because women are still doing 2 and 3 times the amount of childcare and housework. It's gone off the charts in COVID. And so we do a lot, we do a lot of research, education. We also have practical tools. How do we change that so that we begin to expect more sharing at home, so that men are more able and supported to be caregivers at home? Because you can't have equity at work until you have equity at home. So we try to work across the gender spectrum. We try to work across work and home. And we do that by really focusing on shared narratives, on using a lot of journalism and storytelling, combining data, academic research, really getting it out there to help open eyes and minds that there are other ways of doing things, to kind of create that shared vision for what it could be here. So that's the work of the Better Life Lab. And then individually, we do work on the individual, the organizational, as well as the public policy level. But for individuals, I just go back to the research that I did for my book. Right now, it's more important than ever to recognize, number one, recognize and be aware that this is an unusual time and that you are under a lot of undue stress, that there is a lot of stress that comes from ambiguity. We don't know how this is going to end or when. We don't know if going to the grocery store is going to make us sick. We don't know that. Like me, my daughter was at college and she was calling me and crying and she wanted to come home. She didn't feel well. I let her come home. Well, she tested positive for COVID, and then we all got COVID. So there's so much uncertainty out there. Yet we've all recovered. We're all fine, thank goodness. But this is a very frightening time. And so I think that one of the main things that you can do is recognize that, give yourself some grace. This is not a normal time. And when we emerge, it's going to be different. And nobody knows what that looks like. And because there's so much uncertainty, give yourself some grace and compassion and recognize that maybe you can't control time, but you can control your expectations and your priorities, and focus on that and ratchet it down a little bit. Maybe instead of trying to do 75 things, there's one. Focus on one priority today, and then your day's a win.
I think that is sage and pertinent advice, and kind of preempts my last question. So I'm going to have you talk. Can you talk a little bit? I know you've worked on Overwhelmed, which I highly recommend. You said you're working on another book now. What's that about?
Yeah, so after I finished Overwhelmed, it was so clear to me that so much of the problem for women, for gender equality, for working families was really centered at work. That that work had changed, that the world had changed, but the way we worked has not, in ways that are positive, if you will. So what I'm really doing is looking at work itself and what I call the quest to transform the dysfunctional American way of work. Mm-hmm. There's way too much overwork in this country. In white collar professions, we work among the longest hours of any advanced economy. In the lower wage sectors, you can't get a job that will support your life. And so you cobble together all sorts of different jobs, and then you don't have benefits, and then you're an Uber driver, and there's stress and strain, on both ends of the socioeconomic spectrum. And when you really look at the question of like, well, why does it have to be this way? It really doesn't. And there are decisions that have been made that have led to be this way. And so what I'm doing is I'm following the people who are really trying to change that. And so it's called Work in Progress. And so it's really looking at work culture and how we change it so that it works for everyone. It works for business. Right. Certainly, that's important. You want dynamic business, but it also works for the health and well-being of workers and for all people to have time for care and connection in their lives.
That I think that it's so germane to where we are right now. It's funny, talk about being in the right place at the right time. I'm sure that the pandemic was not top of mind when you started the work on this. But...
No, this is actually, no. I started reporting this book 5 years ago when I came. This is why I came to New America, was to work on this book.
Right.
And so, you know, and then, yeah, I sort of slipped on the banana peel of like being trying to figure out how to be a director of a nonprofit program. But I've constantly been working on this and reporting it in the background. And so I actually had my book proposal ready to go and sent out to my agent, and I worked on it and sent it out, got it to my publisher, and was accepted. And then COVID hit, and so now I have to, you know, obviously rethink a lot of it and re-report a lot of it. So
Right.
no,
Yeah.
this was a book that was envisioned in a very different time, and yet this particular moment is all the more salient, and it's really created an opportunity to think and talk about change in a way that we haven't been at this place before. So potentially, it's a very exciting time.
And I'm excited to read it. Do we have any questions from the chat, Sarah? I see, Bridget, I'm the talker, and Sarah works behind the scenes to make sure everything's okay.
You know, not so far.
Yeah. Well, at this stage, if we've got a handful of people from our local community here online, and then many more watching on our live cast. I think one final thing, Bridget. So one of the things that you mentioned was to give yourself grace. And it sounds like that's the biggest message as an individual for us to do. You know, speaking as the person with the 75 item to-do list, that's a good reminder. Is there any other guidance you want to offer folks before we log off here?
Yeah, you know, because work and home have now really blurred in ways that they were beginning to blur, but now they are just jumbled and on top of each other. You know, recognize that different people have different preferences. Some people like to separate work. Some people like to fuse work and life. You know, just take some time. I would say this is more important than ever, to take a moment to pause. We can all, it seems so counterintuitive. We're so busy. There's like a million more things it seems like to do. But really take that moment to disrupt busyness, you know, even if it's just taking 3 breaths, and kind of get clear on what works best for you. What would give you more energy? What do you need? What does your family need? And create boundaries around that. If you're a separator, try to create rituals around when work begins and when it ends. For me, it's turning on all my office lights. Okay, time for work, you know, and when it ends, turning them all off again, or leaving one on or something. You know, find those rituals that kind of help you figure out when the things begin and end. And if you like fusion and you kind of go back and forth and that gives you energy, be okay with that. You know, that we all have different styles, and maybe it will be different on different days. So taking a little pause to connect with yourself and kind of figure out where you are with your energy, with what you need that day, that can be a great way to kind of help you figure out what that one thing is. And then also give yourself grace if you get to the end of the day and you haven't done it. As you notice, I'm in my workout clothes. I haven't worked out yet today. I'm really hoping I will. But if I don't, I'm going to give myself grace, because there is always tomorrow, thankfully. And, you know, we're all, I guess, recognize that we're doing the best that we can under some very trying circumstances.
And I think that's so on point for all of us right now.
Nancy,
yes.
I actually do have one question before we go.
Yeah.
Bridget, so our community is, a lot of women have taken career breaks and they're looking to get back to work, or they're looking to make a pretty major pivot in their career. So with your work that you do, are you seeing companies moving towards the trend of, I wouldn't say embracing career breaks, but making them more part of like destigmatizing them at least a little bit? Or like, are you seeing any trends in that area? Because the future of work with millennials, the trends are, the data's there that shows that millennials are going to take much more career breaks over the length of their career, you know? And so how are you seeing anything that companies are doing to work with that at all?
Well, it's a great question. And I think when you look historically over time, there was a time when there was much more interest and focus on helping particularly women return to work. And there were a number of big programs. And all of that went away in the Great Recession in 2008. That was sort of like the first thing that people cut. And again, if you look at sort of like the response to the recession in 2008 was, oh my God, all hands on deck, let's go back to what we know. And so anything that was innovative or kind of outside the lines of what sort of people in power were familiar with, that went away. And what's different about this particular crisis, we're in another, economic downturn. What's different is that everybody is working differently. Now CEOs are working out of their laundry rooms and actually figuring out how to make it work. So I think that coming out of this, we are in a much better position for creative ways to respond to work, for an understanding that there needs to be more flexibility, not just in a day, not just in a week, but also over the course of a life or a career. So I'm hopeful. Right now, I think so many businesses are just struggling to stay alive and keep their doors open. The other thing to think about is, the majority of people in this country are employed by small businesses, and small businesses often have more of a kind of a family sensibility. They want to take care of their people. They might not have like a formal policy, but will work with you. So I think that's another thing to consider, that there are sort of the bigger programs at some of the bigger companies, but that a lot of people work for small companies, and that there's a lot of room for some flexibility and negotiation and conversation there.
Great.
I love that. Thank you. And I think
Yeah,
now more than ever, this is important, right? Because women are leaving the traditional workforce in droves. Just this past month, the stats are sad because they can't manage everything with remote schooling and everything. So I think, yes, that hopefully this is different, and that there will be more of a spotlight on it moving forward.
Well, and I think what you're seeing is not, and I was just speaking in terms of flexible work. I think what you're also seeing, because this has just been such a horrific crisis, and everything that like people like us have been saying for a decade or more, is finally getting much more kind of front and center attention, which is good. And so now you've got businesses, you've got public policy, you've got government leaders realizing the system that we had is broken, and we all need to rethink what the system should look like. And what is the role for public policy in supporting families? What is the role for businesses, in supporting, not only working families, but it's supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've also had a, massive racial justice awakening. And so we're beginning to have much more substantive conversations about how do we move forward in a way that really makes sense for the reality of who the workforce is and what they're facing. What are the systems that we all need to create those opportunities for real equity across race and class and gender?
Yeah. We had a question on the chat. Do you know, is there a place to go where companies are actively putting this work-life balance measure into place now? Because I think a lot of us are looking to target those places as we look. So are you aware of anything?
So I will say that there are several efforts underway. There are some, like Working Mother and others, who've put together sort of best places to work that do have some measure. So there are places that you could look now. There are some sort of crowdsourced places you can look, like Fairy God Boss and others that do, LinkedIn is another place to sort of look for particular policies. But in terms of sort of that big list and ranking, let me just say that there are efforts underway to try to figure out how to do that. We've been part of those conversations, and we, I think that is a resource that would be really valuable.
Yeah, we'd love to talk with you more about how we could help build that, because we think it's imperative for women to be able to use that as one of their decision-making criteria when they're going back to work. And you're right. It's good that companies are now starting to think about this. I think there's going to need to be an element of someone's going to need to show them the way.
Well, so part of what the power for something like that could be is not just in, as you're choosing where to work or where to apply, but also where you want to spend your dollars. Voting with the power of your purse is, and making it clear why you're making those decisions is a really important potentially a very important sort of leverage point to really make change.
Absolutely. So it's both the supply side and the demand side. And, there's places like Gender Fair and the W Marketplace,
Yes.
those are starting to come online. But yeah, we believe you've got to put your money where your mouth is, both as a consumer and as a provider of your skills to the market. So we'll look forward to seeing what comes out there. So the best way to follow you is at the Better Life Lab. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'd love it. We have a social media platform. It's just at Better Life Lab. I also do social media. We have a weekly newsletter that comes out called Your Life Better. So if you go to our website, you can sign up and subscribe to that. And that is the best of all. We say like sort of 5 things you need to know to make your life better at work and at home. And it's the best of our work. And it's also a roundup of some of the latest news on work redesign, gender equality, and family supportive public policy. So we amplify a lot of our partners. If you really want to know what's happening in this space, we're really on top of all of that. And so we're also doing these really cool behavioral science inspired experiments. We call them BLLX, to try to help families and couples more fairly share the labor at home, because there's not like you can pass a public policy to make people do that. So this is like exposure therapy to try to help begin to bring awareness, because a lot of times people just fall into these traditional gender roles and don't even realize it. To create more space for conversation, because a lot of times when you try to talk, you just get into fights. And believe me, I know, I was there for 15 years, and you're nagging. Well, you don't do anything. Well, I hate you. And
have you been at my house?
Yeah, well, no, I wrote a whole chapter. If you read there's one chapter in Overwhelmed, I called it my rage chapter, where I talk about this division of labor at home that's so unfair. So this is really a very practical way to try to shift that. So we're hosting a happy hour for our beta testers. We've got about 400 beta testers helping us figure out if these actually work and how to make these experiments better. So we would absolutely invite your community to be part of our beta testing experiment and give us feedback on how we could make this work, what difference it could make, and how to scale it.
That sounds great. All right, Bridget, thank you so much for all of your time and insight. We'll follow up online with you. We'll have this posted to our community site and as well as to our public page. And I hope you get that workout in today. No pressure.
Oh, I do too. But if I don't, you know what? It's still going to be a good day.
It's all right. There's always tomorrow.
And even so, it's still, I'm just doing the best I can.
Right. As we all are. Brigid Schulte from the Better Life Labs, thank you so much for joining our community today. And we'll look forward to following up with you online.
That sounds great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Day, everybody.
Bye. Bye.